Jackie, I think you're muted, my dear.
Right. I'm sorry. Most of the material that we're going to be looking at centers around the work of Mahzarin Banaji and her team at Harvard. She and Tony Greenwald developed the implicit association test that I asked Lori to have you all take a shot at. If you weren't able to do it, that's fine. But I would like to ask a couple of you to just share your response to your results, and if you could just describe what happened, and were you surprised at your results, and what do you think about the results? Are they accurate?
I was surprised I couldn't make it work. I tried 3 times and it kept throwing me back to the who are you and
oh no,
what did you do for a living? So I never was able to actually get to the survey.
Okay. Was there anyone who was able to?
It was an intelligence test I failed.
No.
Yeah. Hey, Jackie, will they be able to, people who were not able to take it, will they be able to after tonight?
Oh, absolutely. It's up constantly. They're constantly collecting data.
So I took it, and I think I don't know if I took it right or understood it, because it ended up being that I was strongly biased or something. And I don't think I'm that strong. I might be minor, but I just don't see that I was what it said. And I was trying to, maybe I answered the questions wrong. I said, because the way you answered the questions, you are strongly, biased for Europeans.
Okay.
European Americans. I'm going, I don't think I'm strongly biased for Europe. So I must have answered them. I was thinking about going back in and trying it again and see if maybe I missed something, because I felt like they wanted me to, maybe I missed something.
I think you missed anything. I think, Bobby?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I had to try it with 2 different electronics. I tried it with the phone, and there was no way to do the left hand, right hand tap with a phone, because you had to, it split in half the information. Even when I put it on the side, it wouldn't work. So I just backed out and went back to the iPad, where I could see the whole thing, green on both sides. And then I did the little tap, tap, tap that they asked me to. And when I was done, it said, let's see, you show no bias one way or another.
Okay.
I don't know if the wording, instantaneous bias, or whatever the words they used. But I didn't know if, while I was doing it, I was trying to, while I was doing it, figure out what they were trying to have me do while I did it. So I don't know. But still, when it was done, it was like, okay, but I just don't quite understand the science behind it. And I think while I was doing it, I was also trying to meta process. Like, is this a trick? How is this a trick? And how, you know what I mean?
Maybe I overthought it.
So so we're going to talk about it a little bit, but the whole idea is to get your instant response, not for you to think about it, but what's your quick response, because that's what we tend to operate in, is our first quick response.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I was trying to do quick responses, and I kept on getting X's that made me feel like I must be doing something really wrong when a red X flops into your face and wants you to choose again.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that meant, but let's hold on to that. If you were able to, that's fine. If you weren't, it won't affect your ability to participate in our discussion tonight. So one of the things, you've heard the concept, seeing is believing, but is seeing really believing? So we're gonna take a look at another video. This one is only a couple of minutes, but I want you to look carefully.
Take a look at this checkerboard, created by vision scientist Edward Adelson. The squares labeled A and B are exactly the same shade of gray. Don't believe me? I don't blame you, I see them as different too. But here's the proof. Simply connect the two with this gray bar, and voila. Suddenly it's obvious. A and B are identical. Here's the strange thing. Remove the bar, and the illusion comes back immediately, just as strong as it was before. We can do this again for the skeptics. Different shades of gray, same shades of gray. Different, same. Our eyes can see that A and B are identical, but our brains fall for it every time, no matter how often you debunk the illusion. Why? Professor Adelson points to two specific details. First, contrast. A looks darker because it's surrounded by lighter colored squares. The opposite is true for B. Second, take a look at the soft edges of this darker section. Our brains see this and think, ah, it's a shadow. We know that objects in shadows look darker than they actually are. So our brains compensate for that by making us actually see B as lighter. Something else to consider. We all know what a checkerboard pattern looks like. So we come into this illusion already expecting A and B to be different. And that could influence what we see. What about expectations we have about people? Which face is darker, the one on the left or the one on the right? Psychologists Daniel Levin and Mahzarin Banaji found that most people, including Mahzarin herself, see the black face as darker than the white face, even though the two faces are the exact same shade of gray. Again, debunking the illusion is simple. Here's an idea from Dan.
Just cover up the lower parts of the faces. You'll be left with two foreheads and they'll look exactly the same.
The features of the face matter. But in a second study, the researchers showed that you could create this illusion using the same face. People saw a racially ambiguous face labeled black as darker than the same face labeled white. Did you? Think about what this means. We see two faces. They are identical. But we're so used to associating different races with different skin tones that we misperceive a simple physical reality, all because of a single word. That's how powerful our expectations are.
Whoa. Wow.
Take a look at this checkerboard.
Okay. So that was shocking, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Our brains play tricks on us. And because of the way we are conditioned and we're conditioned in a 3D world, our brains compensate for what we're constantly exposed to. And so it can play tricks on us. And so the media uses that a lot to take advantage of us. Even there are things called mind bugs. And in our full workshop, we talk about the concept of mind bugs and how our perceptions are shaped by the things that we're exposed to constantly. We're given that single story. Remember from the beginning, we're told of something over and over and over again until we believe it to be that particular thing. And so I want to just kind of shift things a little bit and ask you. Now I know I'm a math teacher, so it's only going to be a minute, so don't shut down on the math. But in our country, we're over 300 million people in this country, right? And the vast majority right now, the predominant group of people are people who identify as white. And then the next large group is the Latinx. And these are old numbers. This is 2018. I think it's like 20 or 22% for Latinx now. And then Black or African American. And so my question is, within their groups, I'd like you to guess, just, you don't have to say anything, just take a guess of within the group, if you were in a room with 100 white people, how many would be considered poor? That's what percentage is. So some number out of 100. What percentage of the group that identifies itself as white would be poor?
Jackie, are we considering it based on perception or actual?
Whatever you think, what you think. All right. So I just let you see that one. So 9 people out of 100 people in the group that identifies itself as white are poor. So less than 10% of the white population is in the category of poor. In Latinx, it's about 19%. But in the African-American community, 22 people in the 100 people in a group of Black people or African-American would be considered poor. And so you tend to think, okay, there are way more Black people who are poor, but look at the number of African-American people who are in, they're only 13%. So if you're in a room with 100 people, 13 of them would be Black, right? And so if 22% of that 13, that's a very small number, but we always tend to think that there are far more people who are poor, who are Black. But the reality is that there are far more people who identify as white who are poor, right? And then if you say, well, why is it that we think that there are so many more people who identify as Black or African-American who are poor? What is that? Well, when you think about it, and you think about, okay, if you had to identify a poor white neighborhood and identify the characteristics of it, would you be able to do it quickly? Probably not. A Latinx community, if you drove through the town, would you be able to tell right away if you were in a poor part of town where Latinx people tend to be? Probably. But it is for sure that if you drive through a city and there is an African-American community, you will be able to identify right away where the poor section of town is. And so someone did, it was a Kaiser Foundation, Family Foundation that did the research and found out that if you were to look for a state where more than 19% of the people who are white were poor, you wouldn't find one state in the whole country where you would have a concentration of poverty that was above 19% of the people. Latinx, 32 states you could easily identify, and the same thing for African Americans. So even though the reality is that there are far more people who identify as white who are poor, because we don't get to see it as blatantly as we do Black and Latinx poverty, we don't identify whites with poverty. It's called conditioning. And so here's one. I was driving, I was at a Wegmans grocery store the other day, and I saw a bus, and look what the bus had on it. I'm a WIC baby, but who's represented there? Now I live in Howard County, and there are far more white people who are getting WIC than there are Black people, but who do they put on the bus? Wow. Okay, and then let's look at what dear old Mr. Nixon did back in the 60s. And so would someone read that, if you could for me, read that little clip there? I'm dyslexic and I always mess up, so I don't want to mess up the reading. Lori, would you read it for us, please?
Sure. We knew by getting the public to associate Blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
So now,
yep,
that's what happened in the 60s. And that's when the crack epidemic and all of that, heroin, all of that came into the African-American community. But what's your understanding of drug addiction before it became an issue where folks were, people who identify as white were using methamphetamines? drugs was a criminal thing, but now it's become a medical issue. It's always been a medical issue, but we were criminalized for it. So that's again conditioning.
Jacky,
so,
there's something else too on that where it says on the evening news. That was in the days when the evening news would be 30 minutes on each of the network channels, and now it's 24/7. So it would be even coming at you even more.
Exactly. And so here's the result of what was done. So they criminalized the drugs heavily, powdered cocaine much more, less heavily than crack cocaine.
Right.
And because of that, remember, we're only 13%, or that's what they say, 13% of the population. But look at the disparity in the numbers of people who are African-American who were arrested for the drug offenses versus those who are white. Against perception, because the reality is that there were far more whites using drugs than blacks. But if you're looking for drugs in the Black community, of course, you're going to find them, especially if you put them there. Right. So I'd like to take a minute for you to go into your breakout rooms and feel free to come back if you finish your conversation. Don't feel like you're stuck in the breakout room. But I'd like for you to reflect on what you learned from the visual illusion video clip and what your thoughts are about the poverty and drug arrest information that I shared. And then discuss the implication that this information may have on your judgment of people who identify racially different from you. And I see a typo here. So Laura, if you could take us.
Sure. Hi. No, you've got plenty to eat.
There it is again. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so I hope you all have enough time in your breakout rooms. I don't like to rush people through that. Yeah. So I'd like for you to take a minute. When you hear the term American, what comes to your mind? Who do you see? What image do you get in your mind? And now describe what that American looks like. Is it a European? A person of European descent, I mean? Would you ever imagine an Asian or an indigenous person? An African American? So there's this 1-minute clip that helps us to think about that a little bit.
This is British actor Hugh Grant. And this is American figure skater Kristi Yamaguchi, Olympic gold medalist and 2-time world champion. Are they equally American? Of course not. One of them isn't American at all. But at some level, our minds see someone like Grant as more American than someone like Yamaguchi.
Don't be ridiculous.
Citizenship may have a precise legal definition. If you're born in the United States, you're American. But Thierry Devos' research with Mazarine showed that implicitly, our minds follow a different rule. American equals white.
Is that true? The question is why? Why is it that our default is to think American is white? So the way that we are socialized, the way we're trained in our families, is the way that we start to identify and determine the way things, what's normal, the way things are. All of these elements, our family, our friends, our religion, or lack thereof, the government, social groups, media in particular, our cultural groups, our schooling, where we work, all those things inform the automatic assumptions that we make, the automatic decisions that we make, that we come to about a particular thing or particular group. And it's not that there's the perception that, well, good people can't be racist, or the understanding of a racist is that they're bad people. It has nothing to do with goodness or badness. It has to do with how you've been socialized and what your automatic assumptions or your automatic go-to is about people. And so when we think about being biased, we're very defensive, like, oh, no, I'm not biased. But the reality is that that's the way that our brains work. Think about a baby. A baby is trying to make sense of its environment. And so once it learns to pick up things, what's the first thing it does? It puts something in its mouth. What he's doing is trying to figure out, okay, is this good or bad? That's categorizing. That's what bias does. Bias determines if something's one way or the other. And depending on how we're socialized, our biases are informed by that. And so through the conditioning that we get from media and all the other things we've been exposed to, the rules and regulations that we're taught in our community and within our families and in the organizations that we belong to, those things inform our biases. But the reality is that research has shown that by 3 months of age, babies stare longer at faces that come from their particular racial group. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that would happen? Now, the baby doesn't know what race it is. What is it that would make it?
Trying to identify if it's a parent or someone they know?
Yeah. So if it's someone that looks like their family, then they're going to look longer at that person than someone who's totally different, right? So a baby is learning by differentiating. That's a form of bias. And by 9 months, infants are able to tell people from their own race versus people from others. That's when they start to recognize stranger danger, that kind of thing. And so we're not going to break out this time. I want us to stay in a whole group because we're not that large. But I want us to reflect on how socialization and conditioning have impacted the way that we engage with people of different lived experiences than ours. And then discuss how our ideas of who and what an American may need to be challenged, especially in light of what happened yesterday. So I'd like it to be a whole group discussion. And, of course, we want to let everyone have an opportunity to share. But I think since in light of what happened yesterday, I think it would be helpful if we kind of all could hear what people's reaction to the idea of what is American or who is American.
Can we see everybody, Lori?
I think so.
Yeah, Jackie, do you want to go ahead and turn off your screen share?
Yes.
We'll get back to gallery view.
Okay. Let me see if I can do that quickly. There we go. Okay. Okay. So the nice thing about breakout rooms is there are only a few people and you got to talk. But I really would like to hear, and if you would prefer to go in a breakout room and to discuss that's fine. But I thought it would be good in light of what we experienced yesterday, because there are people who really think that they need to take their country back. Mm-hmm. And that they're the true Americans. Yes, Bobby?
Something I've been thinking about a lot is hyphenations, mm-hmm. and that the language that we use, and it's only since we've been meeting in the autumn when we were meeting that I realized I never say someone is Euro-American. I always say American, and then African-American, and everybody has a hyphen, which makes white people as default and adds to this whole concept. And it's like, oh, maybe I want to start a thing introducing myself as Euro-American. And it would be nice if that was a thing, because as long as everybody else hyphenates and one person is left, there's always that default.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. That's true.
That's good.
Yeah.
Just think about what's been lost by taking on the identity of white, though. Because you can't reference the culture that you identify with the most. So if you're Italian, you don't call yourself Italian American, you call yourself white.
Still be Euro-American.
Yeah, right? Euro-American, right.
Well, when I go to my Italian family's reunions, we all say we're Italian Americans. But other than that, I don't do that around anybody. Yeah.
So why is it that you wouldn't do? Is there something about being an Italian American that you wouldn't want to identify that outside of your family?
No, it's just easy, Well, a lot of even the questionnaires that you do, they'll say white, and I'm always looking at them. Where's the Italian American? It's Hispanic and African, and then they have white, so I have to check white, and I keep on. Where's the Italian American? I'll check it off. Yeah.
I remember as a boy, and I didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but I remember my mother coming home from the butcher shop one day. And back in the 1870s, we had some relatives who came from Germany. And so the meat butcher asked her, this is during World War II, which side she was for because she was German American.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
My mother was not impressed. So
wow.
There's usually a other on the bottom. So you could always put in other on it. And if everybody went other, and then specified.
Yeah.
So you know that the categorization was done by the government. So it was a way of keeping us divided. It's a way of keeping track of things, but it's also a way of keeping us divided. And so just like we're constantly conditioned to think, okay, white people can only identify as white because that's the only check the box that you can check. But I wanted to, just before we run out of time, I want to move forward and share these last couple of ideas with you. Can you see this? Let's see. Okay, full screen. Okay. So the question is, we've all been impacted by socialization and conditioning, right? The question is, how can we override it? I want you to take a look at this little image here. Just tell me quickly, what do you see? Just quick as you can, what do you see?
A river. Flowing river.
Running water.
Okay. Okay.
Stream.
Okay.
Babbling stream. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference in what you're seeing inside that circle versus outside that circle?
The contrast. Yeah. Vivid colors.
Snow.
So what's the circle doing?
Focus.
Focus. It's giving focus. And so we use this image as an indicator in our workshops called changing the lens, because when you take a filter, if you're out in a very sunny area and you use a light filter, it will filter out the blaze of the sunlight. And so we think of the kind of that haziness is the haze of bias and, you know, our implicit bias that we're not even aware of until we filter out that bias. And so we think about how the implicit bias test that some of you all took. It is counting on you giving your quick response, because Daniel Kahneman, a scientist, came up with this concept of the fast and slow thinking brain. And he calls the fast thinking brain system 1. I mean, the slow thinking brain system 1, and the fast thinking brain system 2, right? And so the system 2 is the one that we operate in. That's the quick response, our automatic response. That's when we're able to, you know, we just do things without even thinking. Once you learn how to drive, you don't even think about it. It's automatic, but it's error prone. And so in order to override our automatic assumptions, we have to turn on system 1, our slow, conscious thinking, logical part of our brain, to override our erroneous thinking. And so in order to counteract our automatic assumptions, we have to stop and slow down our thinking. That's how we can override it, but it takes time and effort. And in our, did someone want to say something? I didn't want to cut you. I thought I heard someone. Okay. So in our longer workshops, we actually go deep into what it is that causes, you know, how our minds are trained to be biased, and to give you some ideas of how to override those biases. But the book that the Thursday conversation is going to have us delve into has done an excellent job. It's a 28-day challenge. And what it's going to do is to ask us to go into this 28-day experience and journal our reactions to what we see. And so I would like to suggest that if you do delve into this book, that you choose to get serious about it, get yourself a journal, and then decide whether you want to do it with a group or if you want to do it on your own as a personal journaling experience for 28 days. And then to hold yourself just like you would if you were on a diet or you were exercising, you want to hold yourself accountable to someone to make sure that you follow through and finish the entire journey. And so if you haven't picked up the book, I strongly urge you to pick it up, because what Layla Saad does in the 28 days is to kind of debunk and challenge some of the things that, quote, good people may not even be aware of that's operating inside of them. And so in her book, she uses the term BIPOC. It's for Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so I want to challenge you on that. That's a new terminology that's being used as we talk about the marginalized people in our society. They say that they're Black, they're Indigenous people, and people of color would include the Latinx, the Asian, the any other group, maybe Middle Eastern people who may be marginalized in this culture. But I want to challenge you, because what that term has done in my mind is to take the real deep-seated struggle of African Americans or Black people in this country whose family came out of slavery, and the Indigenous peoples whose lands were stolen, and mushed it together with people who have come from other cultures, other countries, who don't have the same experience or the same bigotry and bias imposed on them as African Americans have dealt with for over 400 years, and the Indigenous people who have been disenfranchised from the land that they were habitating before the Europeans came. So as you're reading the book, Me and White Supremacy, when you see that BIPOC term, replace it with the concept of Black people or African American, whichever you choose to call it in your mind, or even Indigenous people, because that's where the change needs to happen. Because once you take care of the disenfranchisement and the racist, institutionalized racist policies that have impacted the African American community, all the other people of color will benefit. And so with that, I want to close out so we can have a few minutes, but I want to challenge you with this. The Black Lives Matter movement really came into its own this year, or last year. And I want to challenge you with this thought that the Black Lives Matter movement brought the fire. I mean, it really turned things up a notch. But most of the people in this Thursday community are people my age. We're considered the older people in the community. We have the time, we have the access, and we have the influence to be able to bring about the change. And I'm saying we, but it's really the people who identify as white who have more opportunity than even I do, because I may have the time and I may have the ability, I may not get the access, and I may not have the influence, but most of you in this conversation do. And so I'm asking you, as you're in the privileged place of being able to have more time to engage in whatever part of the struggle that you feel that you can. Then I'm going to close out with a little commercial. Changing the Lens has 3 workshops. We do optics, which you just got a teeny weeny taste of. I really didn't touch on much of what we do, but it's a day and a couple of hours in a day to go through our implicit and explicit biases. And then the Zoom Lens, which goes through the history of how this country became so divided. It's shocking, but every person that's gone through that workshop has said their lens has been changed and they just don't see things the same anymore. And then the new lens, which is our data, where we go into the data about how we became so divided. But that's it for my presentation. I really appreciate you all indulging me and joining in the conversation, and I hope it was of some help to you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring us back.
Thank you so much, Jackie. A real privilege.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Is Greg saying? Oh, I thought he was saying something. So Lori, that however you want to close this out. You're muted, Lori.
Greg, take us home.
Thank you, Jackie, very, very much. That was outstanding, excellent, and what a gift, just a gift. And thank you. Fit in with a lot for our winter series. Thank you, the rest of you, for attending. And again, Happy New Year. And rest assured, we will get through the things that happened yesterday in this country. We will.
See you next week.